My name is Daniel, and this is a story I never thought I'd be sharing publicly. It's about trust, about communication, and about what happens when the person you thought you knew best keeps something from you that changes how you see them. For 5 years, I've been in a relationship with my girlfriend. Like any couple, we've had ups and downs, but I always believed we had a foundation of trust. That trust was tested recently when she went on an overseas trip. It was supposed to be a birthday celebration for one of her close college friends. The trip had been planned for months, since February to be exact, and she'd been excited about it the whole time. Whenever I asked who was going, her answer was always the same. The girls, the birthday girl's boyfriend, and a few of her guy friends. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that would raise a red flag. Since I already knew most of this group through connections, I didn't feel the need to press for more details. After all, why would I? She was my girlfriend of 5 years. If there was something important, she'd tell me, right? So I trusted her. I didn't ask for a full guest list, and I didn't question her about the sleeping arrangements. I figured it was just a group of friends getting together for a fun trip. Once the trip started, she sent me updates, pictures, short messages, casual little stories about what they were doing. Everything seemed completely normal. And then, in one of those updates, she casually dropped a name I wasn't expecting to hear, her ex. In that instant, my heart sank. He wasn't just in the same city. He was part of the trip. He wasn't staying at a hotel down the street. He was in the same Airbnb, living under the same roof as my girlfriend for the entire trip. And the worst part? She never told me. Try to put yourself in my shoes. You think you have a clear picture of what's happening, you trust your partner to be upfront with you, and then you suddenly find out their ex, someone who still holds history and complicated emotions, is right there with them night after night. That's not something you just brush off. If she had been honest with me from the start, I might not have loved the idea, but at least we could have had an open conversation. Maybe we could have set some boundaries, or at the very least, I would have known what was happening instead of being blindsided halfway through. But instead of giving me that choice, she left me in the dark. And here's where it stings even more. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Over the years, there had been a handful of moments when she forgot to mention her ex would be present at group hangouts. The explanations were always the same. She didn't know he'd be there, she forgot to bring it up, or she was too anxious about how I might react, so she just avoided the topic. But how many times can someone forget the same kind of detail? How many times can they act surprised by the same pattern before it stops feeling like an accident? At some point, it doesn't look like a mistake anymore. It looks like a choice. During the trip, I kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to be the guy who ruined her friend's birthday celebration. I didn't want to start a fight that would echo through the rest of the vacation. I told myself I'd wait until she got home, and then we could talk about it. But those days dragged. Every time she texted me, all I could think about was the fact that her ex was right there in the same room, probably sitting across the couch or standing next to her during some group photo. And I couldn't shake the thought, why didn't she tell me? When she came home, I finally brought it up. I explained how hurt I felt, how betrayed I felt, and how much it shook me to realize I was the last to know something this important. I expected her to admit it, maybe apologize, maybe even say she was nervous about my reaction. But instead, her first response left me even more shaken. She looked me in the eye and told me she had already told me. And that's when everything really started to unravel. When she looked me straight in the eye and said she had already told me about her ex being on the trip, I felt something snap inside me. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It wasn't just hurt. It was disbelief. The kind of disbelief that makes your chest tighten because you know what you remember and you know what you didn't hear. I've been with her for 5 years. I know myself well enough to say with certainty that if she had ever told me something as significant as, hey, my ex is going to be staying in the same Airbnb as me for a week overseas, there is no way I would have forgotten it. That kind of detail doesn't slip through the cracks. That kind of detail sticks, whether you want it to or not. So when she insisted that she had told me, It felt like reality itself was being twisted. I kept replaying every conversation leading up to the trip in my head, trying to find even the slightest hint that maybe, just maybe, she was right. But there was nothing. Not one mention, not one warning, not even the faintest clue. And yet, there she was, standing in front of me, doubling down. This is where things took an ugly turn. Instead of the conversation being about her choice to withhold the truth, it became about whether or not my memory could be trusted. And that's when I realized this wasn't just lying by omission anymore. This felt like gaslighting, because when someone insists you remember something that never happened, when they stand firm in a version of reality that contradicts everything you know to be true, you start questioning yourself. You start wondering if you're crazy, or if you somehow missed something. That self-doubt creeps in, and suddenly the issue isn't just about what happened. It's about whether you can trust your own mind. I pushed back hard. I told her flat out, "No, you didn't tell me. I would remember something this big. Don't try to make me feel like I'm imagining things." My voice was shaking, not out of anger at that moment, but from the frustration of knowing I was being forced into a debate over reality itself. That's when she added another layer to the mess. She admitted that her ex had made advances on her during the trip. She claimed she shut them down every time, that she never once crossed a line, and she even went so far as to say I could ask her friends to confirm it. But here's the thing, that doesn't make it better. That doesn't erase the choice she made to hide his presence from me in the first place. If anything, it made it worse. Because now, not only was her ex around, but she was also dealing with unwanted attention from him, and I was left completely unaware while it was happening. Do you see the problem? Do you see the transparency could have solved this from the start? If she had just told me, "Hey, my ex is going to be there, and I want you to know, because I don't want you to feel blindsided," we could have discussed it. I might not have loved the idea, but at least I wouldn't have been left feeling like the fool who found out by accident. But instead, I was kept in the dark. And when I finally confronted her, instead of validating what I was feeling, she tried to rewrite the story as though I was the one who had forgotten. It broke something in me. The trust that we had built over 5 years suddenly felt fragile, like a cracked window waiting for the slightest pressure to shatter. And it wasn't just about the ex anymore. It was about honesty. It was about whether I could trust her to tell me the truth when it mattered most. Later that night, after we had argued back and forth, she left the room. A couple of hours passed before she came back, calmer. She apologized, but not in the way I had hoped. She didn't say, "I lied." She didn't say, "You're right, I should have told you." Instead, she said she was sorry for not hearing me out earlier, for invalidating my feelings, and for making me feel hurt. And while that sounded nice on the surface, it still didn't address the core issue. She was still sticking to her version of events. She still claimed she had told me. She was apologizing for the reaction, not the cause. It left me in a stalemate. On one hand, I had a girlfriend apologizing for how the situation made me feel. On the other hand, I had that same girlfriend insisting on a version of reality I knew wasn't true. It's a strange place to be, half acknowledged, half denied. You get just enough remorse to feel like maybe they care, but not enough honesty to actually rebuild trust. And in the days that followed, that's all I could think about. How do you move forward with someone who refuses to admit the truth? How do you have faith in their words when the memory of this argument reminds you that they're capable of rewriting history? This wasn't just about the ex. This was about whether or not our relationship could survive the erosion of trust. After the dust settled from our initial argument, I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything over and over. It wasn't just the trip anymore. It was the way the entire situation was handled. The omission, the denial, the gaslighting, and the half-hearted apology that didn't quite touch the heart of the problem. I kept asking myself, am I overreacting? It's a dangerous question because it plants doubt in your own mind. On the surface, it might look like a small issue to some people, a forgotten detail, a simple miscommunication, an ex being present at a group trip. No cheating, no betrayal, in the physical sense, just poor communication. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about the ex. It was about the trust that had been chipped away. Trust isn't broken in one big explosion most of the time. It's not always about catching someone red-handed doing something obvious. Sometimes it breaks slowly, piece by piece, every time. You feel you're being misled. Every time you find out you weren't given the whole story. Every time your partner insists on a version of events that you know isn't true. And that's where I was. I didn't feel like I was losing trust in one dramatic moment. I felt like I was realizing how many small cracks had already formed, without me noticing. Every time she forgot to mention her ex before, every time she brushed off my concerns as if they were trivial, all of that suddenly made sense. It wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't nerves. It was avoidance. And avoidance, in relationships, can be just as damaging as outright lies. Because when someone avoids telling you the truth, what they're really doing is taking away your right to make informed decisions. They're deciding for you what you need to know, what you can handle, and what you should accept. That realization hit hard. I thought about all the moments over the years when I had trusted her blindly. All the times I had assumed that if something mattered, she'd tell me. And then I contrasted that with the reality of this trip, where I found out something critical only because she slipped up and casually mentioned his name. It made me question, what else haven't I been told? That's the thing about broken trust. Once you see the cracks, you start looking for them everywhere. You start wondering what's real and what's been curated for you. You start questioning the authenticity of the entire relationship. And while I was wrestling with all of that, I still had her standing by her claim that she told me. I can't even put into words how heavy that felt. It wasn't just about disagreeing over a memory. It was about her refusing to validate the truth as I knew it. It was about her choosing pride over transparency. At one point, I thought maybe I should just let it go. Maybe the best way forward was to focus on the fact that she eventually apologized, even if it wasn't the apology I wanted. Maybe I should accept that she says she told me, even though I know she didn't, and just move on. But then another thought crept in. If I let this go, what message does that send? If I accept this version of events, am I teaching her that she can bend the truth whenever it's convenient? Am I teaching myself to settle for less than honesty in a relationship? Am I telling her that avoiding the hard conversations is okay, as long as she eventually throws in an apology about my feelings? That scared me more than the fight itself, because I don't want to be in a relationship where dishonesty, even small, subtle dishonesty, becomes normal. I don't want to find myself years down the line, wondering how many other things I wasn't told, how many other truths were bent or omitted because she was anxious about telling me. The weight of all this left me caught in a cycle of doubt. On one hand, I didn't want to blow up a 5-year relationship over what she framed as a small detail. On the other hand, I couldn't ignore the fact that my sense of trust had been shaken to its core. And here's the reality that started to sink in. Once trust is broken, it's not enough for someone to just say sorry. Sorry doesn't glue the pieces back together. Sorry doesn't erase the memory of being blindsided. Sorry doesn't magically make you believe that next time will be different. Trust has to be rebuilt. It has to be earned again. And that takes more than words. But before I could even think about rebuilding, I had to figure out how to communicate with her in a way that didn't spiral into another argument over what really happened. Because until we addressed that, everything else felt like building on sand. The stalemate was real. She was sticking to her story, and I was holding on to mine. And in that middle ground, where neither of us was willing to budge, the relationship felt stuck in limbo. The question was, how do you move forward from that? When you're caught in a stalemate like the one I found myself in, communication becomes the battlefield. On one side, I was clinging to the truth as I remembered it, that she never told me about her ex being on the trip. On the other side, she was clinging to her own version, insisting she had told me. The problem with this kind of deadlock is that it doesn't just sit quietly. It eats away at everything else. Every conversation becomes heavier. Every silence feels louder. Every attempt to move forward feels temporary because the unresolved issue keeps dragging you back. I knew if we were going to have any chance of saving the relationship, we couldn't keep going in circles. Something had to change. One of the first things I realized was that arguing over what happened wasn't working. Every time we went down that road, it was like two people shouting across a canyon, each convinced their echo was the truth. We weren't solving anything. We were just exhausting ourselves. So I tried to shift the focus. Instead of saying, "You didn't tell me," I began saying, "I feel hurt because I wasn't aware." That's a small change in words, but it matters because when you argue facts, the other person feels attacked. But when you share feelings, they can't really deny that. They can only respond to it. Did it magically fix things? No, but it lowered the temperature of the conversation. The next step was setting rules for how we talked about the issue. We agreed to stop mid-conversation if things got too heated. We agreed not to throw old arguments into the mix. And we agreed that even if we didn't land on the same version of events, we needed to at least validate how the other person felt. That last part was key for me. Validation. Because even if she wanted to stick to her belief that she told me, she could still say, "I understand why you feel blindsided, and I understand why that broke your trust." That recognition mattered more than her winning the debate about memory. Still, even with these adjustments, the trust issue hung in the background. And here's the truth. Communication only works if both people are genuinely willing to be open. If one person is still dodging, still rewriting, or still minimizing, then the cycle continues. That's why I had to ask myself some hard questions. Was she really listening, or was she just saying the right words to keep the peace? Was she willing to change how she approached honesty, or was this going to happen again the next time her ex popped up in the same friend group? And while I was working through all this, I also realized something else. Rebuilding trust isn't just about confronting the problem. It's about building new habits together. Habits of transparency. Habits of checking in. Habits of over-communicating. Even if it feels uncomfortable, it means not assuming the other person doesn't need to know. It means not brushing off something because it might cause tension. It means choosing openness, even when it's awkward. And if I'm honest, I wasn't sure she was ready for that level of change. But here's where I want to pause for a second and talk to you, the person watching or listening to this story. If you've ever been in a situation like this, where communication breaks down and trust feels fragile, I want you to think about your own experiences. How did you handle them? Did you find a way to rebuild, or did you realize it wasn't possible? While you're reflecting on that, let me ask for a quick favor. If you're getting value out of this story, if it resonates with you or makes you think differently about relationships, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps support content like this and keeps these conversations going. All right, back to the story. After we agreed to try better communication strategies, I still couldn't shake the fact that there was unfinished business. The wound of being blindsided hadn't healed, and her insistence that she told me made it worse. So I proposed something specific. I told her that from now on, if her ex was ever going to be present at any group event, no matter how casual, no matter how last minute, I needed to be told clearly, directly, and honestly. No, I forgot. No, I didn't think it mattered. No dodging. Just plain transparency. At first, she hesitated. She didn't like the idea of what she called special rules around one person. But I pushed back and said, this wasn't about rules. It was about respect. If you know something will hurt your partner more than the average detail, then hiding it is not a mistake, it's a choice. That's the boundary I started with, a line drawn in the sand. And to me, it felt like the bare minimum if we were ever going to move forward. But even as I set that boundary, part of me wondered, is a boundary really enough when the foundation already feels cracked? Rebuilding trust is one of those things that sounds simple in theory. but feels like climbing a mountain in practice. People throw the phrase around all the time. You just need to rebuild the trust, as if it's a weekend project you can knock out with a little effort. But the reality is, once trust is fractured, every interaction becomes a test. Every choice becomes evidence, one way or the other, for whether the relationship can survive. For me, the first step was acknowledging that rebuilding wasn't going to happen overnight. I couldn't just wake up one day, decide to trust her again, and flip the switch. Trust doesn't work like that. It's not a decision. It's a feeling that grows slowly with consistent action. So I asked myself, what actions would actually help me start to feel safe again in this relationship? The first concrete step was transparency. She had to start volunteering information before I even asked. That meant telling me not just who was going to events, but also being upfront about dynamics that might bother me. No more, I forgot. No more waiting until I stumbled into the truth on my own. I needed her to understand that honesty was no longer optional. It was mandatory if we wanted to keep going. The second step was accountability. If she said she would do something, like check in with me before a group trip or reassure me about who was going, I needed to see her follow through. Small promises matter when you're rebuilding trust. Breaking them, even accidentally, can set you right back to square one. The third step was consistency. One honest conversation doesn't fix anything. Two honest conversations don't fix anything. It takes weeks, months, sometimes years of showing up truthfully for your partner to feel safe again. That's the part people often underestimate. They think one good apology erases the past. It doesn't. It just creates the possibility of a future where trust can grow again. But while I was thinking about all of this, another question was on my mind. What about boundaries with exes? Because here's the thing. Whether she admitted it or not, her ex had created tension between us before. Not because of anything I did, but because of the way she handled his presence in her life. The omissions, the forgetting, the avoidance, all of it revolved around him. So naturally, I started asking myself, what boundaries are reasonable here? For some couples, the answer is obvious. Some people set hard boundaries like no contact with exes, period. Others take a softer approach, saying it's okay to remain friends as long as it's transparent and respectful. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. For me, I didn't feel like I could demand she cut him out completely. That would have felt controlling. But I also couldn't keep living in a world where his presence was hidden from me. That wasn't fair. So I tried to draw a middle line. If he was going to be at an event, I needed to know ahead of time. If he reached out privately, I needed her to be open about it. And if he made advances again, I needed her to shut it down immediately and tell me about it, not weeks later. Those were the boundaries I thought were fair. They weren't about controlling her friendships. They were about creating safety for me in a situation where I'd already been blindsided too many times. But even as I set those boundaries, I kept wondering, were they enough? Because boundaries are only as strong as the willingness of both people to respect them. If one person sees the boundary as rules or restrictions, they'll look for ways around it. If they see it as a form of respect, they'll embrace it. I wanted her to see it as respect. I wanted her to understand that these weren't hoops to jump through, but building blocks for trust. But at the same time, I couldn't control how. She chose to interpret them, and that's the scary part about rebuilding trust. It's not just about your effort. You can't rebuild it alone. Both people have to commit. Both people have to see the cracks and decide they're worth repairing. If only one person is doing the work, the foundation won't hold. In my quieter moments, I found myself thinking, maybe this is the turning point. Maybe this is where we either rebuild something stronger or finally admit it's too broken to fix. And that thought haunted me, because as much as I loved her, I couldn't deny the reality. Love isn't enough. Without trust, you can love someone deeply and still lose the relationship if honesty is missing. So while we were trying to figure things out, I started paying more attention than ever, watching whether she followed through, watching whether her words matched her actions, watching whether she chose avoidance or honesty the next time something uncomfortable came up. Because that's the only way I'd know if rebuilding was really possible. One of the hardest questions I kept circling back to was simple but relentless. Am I overreacting? When you've been hurt by someone you love, it's natural to wonder if your pain is justified or if you're blowing it out of proportion. I thought about the couples I knew who had faced far worse. Partners who had cheated outright. Partners who had walked away and then come back. Partners who had lied about finances or families or entire parts of their lives. Compared to that, my situation seemed smaller. She hadn't cheated. She hadn't abandoned me. She hadn't hidden a secret double life. But then I reminded myself, pain isn't a competition. Just because someone else has gone through worse doesn't make my hurt invalid. The truth was, I felt betrayed. And betrayal doesn't need to be physical to leave scars. Emotional betrayal, the kind that comes from hiding information, gaslighting, and refusing to validate your reality, can eat away at trust just as much as physical infidelity. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just one mistake. This was a pattern. Over the years, her ex had popped up multiple times, and every time she had a reason why she hadn't told me. Every time I was left to find out after the fact. Every time I was asked to accept her explanation as if it erased the hurt. That's not a one-time slip-up. That's a habit of avoidance, and avoidance over time becomes its own kind of betrayal. Still, I wanted to be fair. I wanted to ask myself honestly, what would it take for me to move past this? Could I imagine a future where I trusted her again? And if so, what steps would we both need to take? I started looking into stories of other couples who had gone through similar situations, not necessarily about exes, but about broken trust in general. And what I found was both comforting and daunting. Some couples had rebuilt trust successfully, but it took years. Years of consistent honesty, years of couples therapy, years of painful conversations where the hurt partner had to keep bringing up old wounds until they finally stopped bleeding. Other couples didn't make it. They tried to push forward, but the lack of trust kept resurfacing until the relationship collapsed under its weight. The difference in almost every case came down to one thing: accountability. The partners who made it work were the ones who admitted their mistake fully, without excuses, without rewriting the story, without minimizing what happened. They took ownership, and they proved over time that they could change. That's where my situation felt stuck. My girlfriend apologized, yes, but she never fully admitted the truth. She never said, "You're right, I should have told you, and I didn't." Instead, she stayed attached to her version of events, that she had told me, and I just didn't remember. And that's what left me spinning. How do you rebuild trust with someone who won't even admit the foundation cracked? How do you heal when the other person insists the wound doesn't exist? I knew we couldn't move forward without some kind of acknowledgement, not just an apology for my feelings, but an acknowledgement of the actual event that broke the trust. Without that, everything else would feel like surface-level repair, painting over rotting wood. But I also had to be realistic with myself. Was I willing to wait for that acknowledgement? Was I willing to keep investing in someone who might never give me the clarity I needed? It's not an easy question. When you've invested 5 years into a relationship, walking away feels like throwing away a huge part of your life. But staying, without real change, can feel like betraying yourself. And that's what I started to wrestle with most. The balance between loyalty to her and loyalty to myself. Because at the end of the day, if the relationship kept going like this, with half-truths, with omissions, with me second-guessing reality, then I wasn't just losing trust in her. I was losing trust in myself, and that's a cost I wasn't sure I could afford. So the question became, is this relationship something I can truly rebuild? Or is it already too damaged to survive? The answer wasn't clear yet, but I knew one thing for sure. The decision was coming, and it wasn't something I could put off forever. When I look back at everything that happened, I see a relationship at a crossroads. On one side, there's the potential to rebuild. On the other, there's the reality that some cracks never fully mend. The truth is, I don't know which side we'll end up on yet, but I do know what I've learned, and maybe sharing that will help someone else who finds themselves in the same position. The first lesson is about communication. Real communication isn't just about talking. It's about honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. My girlfriend's mistake wasn't just that her ex was on the trip. It was that she made a choice not to tell me because she didn't want to deal with the discomfort of my reaction. And in doing so, she traded temporary peace for long-term damage. That's something I'll carry with me. Avoiding hard conversations doesn't make problems disappear. It just plants seeds of mistrust that grow bigger over time. The second lesson is about trust. Trust isn't a static thing you set once and forget. It's alive. It needs to be fed, maintained, and respected. It's built on the little choices people make every day. Choices to be transparent, choices to respect boundaries, choices to show up consistently. Once broken, trust doesn't just reset. It demands work, and it demands honesty, not half-truths, not "I thought I told you," not apologies that only scratch the surface. The third lesson is about boundaries. A lot of people think boundaries are restrictions, but I've come to see them differently. Boundaries aren't about controlling someone else. They're about protecting yourself. They're about saying, this is what I need to feel safe, respected, and valued in this relationship. For me, that meant setting clear expectations about transparency when it came to her ex. For someone else, the boundary might look different, but the point is the same. Boundaries aren't punishments. They're tools for survival in a relationship that matters. And finally, I've learned something about myself. For a long time, I thought being in love meant being endlessly forgiving, endlessly understanding, endlessly patient. But love without self-respect isn't love. It's sacrifice. And while compromise is part of any relationship, compromising your sense of truth and your need for honesty isn't healthy. That's not compromise, that's surrender. So where does that leave us? Honestly, I don't know yet. Maybe we'll put in the work and rebuild something stronger. Maybe I'll realize that too much damage has been done, and it's time to let go. What I do know is that whatever happens, I'll never look at communication and trust the same way again. And if you're in a situation like mine, here's what I'd say. Don't ignore your gut. Don't minimize your hurt just because it doesn't look like someone else's. Your pain is valid. Your need for honesty is valid. And if the person you're with can't give you that, then you need to decide if the relationship is still worth holding on to. At the end of the day, relationships are partnerships. They only work when both people are willing to face the uncomfortable truths together. And if one person insists on rewriting history while the other clings to reality, the partnership breaks down. So I'm still figuring it out. I'm still weighing my options. But no matter what happens, I know this. I'll never settle for a love that leaves me questioning my own memory, my own worth, or my own need for honesty. With that said, thanks for watching. Until next time, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this.